Good day, everyone. I am Krisa Faye Kalumba from the Department of Food Science and Chemistry, and it is my pleasure to talk about the topic linking familiarity with indigenous vegetables to nutritional status of female in school adolescents, a preliminary study. This presentation will feature part of the results of our in-house funded research project. Malnutrition remains a serious problem worldwide, especially in low and middle income countries. The double burden of malnutrition, which includes undernutrition such as wasting, stunting, and underweight, as well as inadequate vitamins or minerals, overweight, obesity, and resulting diet related diseases, remains widespread. This has developmental, economic, social, and medical impacts. We know that good nutrition is important to promote individual health, and this is part of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we must optimize early nutrition, especially in low and middle income countries such as the Philippines. Malnutrition is particularly common among women. Women, infants, children, and adolescents are at particular risk of malnutrition. Deficiencies in iodine, vitamin A, and iron are a major threat to children and pregnant women, and this is according to the World Health Organization. Millions of women of reproductive age are even affected by anemia. Malnutrition is widespread among adolescents. These are those aged 10 to 19 years. However, the risk factors for this group remain neglected. Moreover, school programs play a role in nutrition education, as adolescence is a period of faster growth rate and significant nutrition transition from childhood to adulthood. Improper nutrition may lead to further health issues. So, this period provides an opportunity for introducing interventions which can drive attitudes toward healthy eating. Chronic undernutrition may delay adolescent growth. This may overlap with the age of first pregnancy. Approximately 40% of adolescent females in developing countries are anemic. Overweight and obesity negatively impact sexual and reproductive health, and this excess weight is a risk factor for menstrual abnormalities, miscarriage, and pregnancy complications. Around 16 million girls aged 15 to 19 and 2.5 million girls under 16 give birth each year in developing regions. And during adolescent pregnancy, they have limited nutrient availability. Malnourished women become at high risk of low baby birth weight, which makes the cycle of malnutrition continue. According to UNICEF, the nutritional status of adolescent girls and women impacts the growth and development of their future children. Unhealthy dietary practices of an undernourished child can lead to a malnourished adolescent. Unhealthy dietary practices of a malnourished adolescent can lead to malnourished women. In this study, we investigated indigenous vegetables, which we defined as those that are native to a particular region and are underutilized, undervalued, and not grown commercially. That means they are grown in a traditional manner and not given modern methods of production, such as a heavy fertilizer and pesticide use. These indigenous vegetables are consumed in specific locations as part of traditional diets or as parts of cultural identity, but they still remain neglected and underutilized. It has been reported in previous studies that utilizing indigenous vegetables has a great potential in combating food insecurity in the country. They can also diversify the diet. They may be cheaper and nutritious, and familiarizing the adolescents with a local produce will lead to higher consumption of these indigenous vegetables. This can also provide an alternative livelihood opportunity. In this presentation, we are seeking to answer the question: is familiarity with indigenous vegetables linked to the nutritional status of female adolescents? Again, these preliminary results describe the link between familiarity with indigenous vegetables and nutritional status. We are in the process of analyzing the associations among actual indigenous vegetable intakes, pertinent nutrient intakes, and nutritional status of the participating in school adolescents. So in this study, public high schools in urban and rural areas in Davao City were randomly selected. And the number of students per school was determined using a proportional allocation. We based this on the most recent enrollment, which we secured from the Department of Education in the Davao City Division. And the participants were 11th grade students. So the urban schools were Santo Niño National High School, Francisco Bangoy National High School, and Elias V. Lopez Memorial National High School. The rural schools were Waan National High School, Suawan National High School, and Emilio Estipona National High School. The data were collected through personal interviews using a pre-tested questionnaire. And an informed consent form was used, which was translated into the local dialect. So this is just a part of the informed consent form. All the return questionnaires were also checked for completeness to exclude missing data. So we had to make sure that the informed consent forms were really signed by the respondents and their parents. So these are just some of the photos during the data collection. We first coordinated with the school administrators. These photos were taken in Santo Niño National High School, F. Bangoy National High School, and Suawa National High School. And these are also some of the photos which were taken during the actual interview. So again, the data were collected through personal interviews, and we also pre-tested the questionnaire that we used. So we communicated with the respondents using the local dialect. The body mass index, or the BMI, was also obtained by measuring the height and weight of the in-school adolescents. BMI is an index of weight for height, and this is commonly used to classify underweight, overweight, and obesity. And BMI is a widely accepted measure of nutritional status. So this is what we use to determine the link between nutritional status and familiarity with indigenous vegetables. The data were statistically analyzed using ANOVA Tukey's test as post hoc, and the SPSS software was used in the analysis. This table shows the socio-demographic profile of the respondents. So again, we had respondents from the schools in rural areas and the schools in urban areas. And we are interested in the female respondents. So this will include sex disaggregated data. Now, this table shows the indigenous vegetables that in school adolescents in rural areas, this is in rural areas, are most familiar with. Take note that this is based on multiple responses. There were other vegetables mentioned, but they are not indigenous. So the indigenous vegetables that the respondents mentioned were malunggay, sayote, kangkong, alugbati, munggo, puso ng saging, and dahon ng ampalaya. So we can see that in general, the female respondents were more familiar with indigenous vegetables. This next table shows the indigenous vegetables that in-school adolescents in urban areas are most familiar with. So they're almost the same with the vegetables in the previous slide. So we have here malunggay, sayote, kangkong, talbos ng kamote, alugbati, munggo, garlang, and saluyot. And we can see the same trend here for the female respondents. So these are the indigenous vegetables that were mentioned. We have malunggay, sayote, kangkong. In a previous study, we also showed that malunggay is rich in iron. So this was incorporated in the production of malunggay peanut butter cookies. We also have alugbati, munggo, puso ng saging, dahon ng ampalaya. We also showed through the undergraduate thesis of one of our BS Food Technology students that alugbati is rich in vitamin A. So that was through the production of alugbati egg noodles. We also have talbos ng kamote, garlang, and saluyot. We can take note that the consumption of indigenous vegetables depends on the familiarity with its use, how available it is in the market, and the presence of substitutes. So these were the indigenous vegetables that were mentioned by the respondents in this study. Table 4 shows the BMI category based on familiarity with indigenous vegetables. And we can see that the average number of indigenous vegetables that the participants were familiar with differs among the various BMI categories. Okay? Specifically, the average number of indigenous vegetables familiar among students with normal BMI significantly differs from that among students who are overweight. So those who are overweight are familiar with significantly fewer indigenous vegetables. That's 0.3 according to this table. Table 5 shows the BMI category and sex of the respondents. So we can see here that more females, that's 61%, than males are underweight. This table shows the BMI and sex. And the average BMI of the female respondents is significantly lower. That's a significant at a significance level of 0.05 than the average BMI of the male respondents. And table 7 shows the BMI and school classification of the respondents. And here we can see that the average BMI of the respondents in rural areas is significantly lower than that of those in urban areas. And we also interviewed the respondents regarding their vegetable consumption practices. And we found that about 30% perceive vegetables as good for the body and are good tasting. And the majority usually consume the vegetables at home. And more in-school adolescents in urban areas eat less vegetables now than before, or no change at all, compared to those in rural areas. So we can see the difference in dietary habits. So those in an urban setting consume more snacks. So in general, food options are more widely available in urban than rural areas. That has been proven in several studies. And urban adolescents have been shown to again consume more snacks. And this was associated with a higher BMI. Also, in previous studies, inadequate nutrient intakes among adolescents was observed, especially in rural and poor families. The Filipino female adolescents aged 17 to 20 years were also shown to have significantly lower vegetable intake. And according to this paper, adolescent girls require nutrition support to become nourished women. In conclusion, in school adolescents with normal BMI have significantly better familiarity with indigenous vegetables. Being overweight is also linked to poor familiarity with indigenous vegetables. That's according to the results of this study. In school female adolescents have lower BMI, with the majority being underweight. And again, that's according to the population in the study. And actual vegetable consumption and nutrient intakes are still being studied. So again, these are preliminary data. We want to further determine the associations once we get the data on the actual vegetable consumption and the nutrient intakes. So there is a need to improve the attitude of adolescents toward indigenous vegetables. And we can also improve the public's awareness and knowledge about indigenous vegetables in the Philippines. So we aim to provide policy recommendations on dietary guidelines for adolescents in the context of a pandemic, as well as introduce nutrition interventions for adolescent girls, and again, give nutrition-based recommendations for urban versus rural areas. And we also hope to establish the role of indigenous vegetables in alleviating malnutrition. We also want to study the nutritional quality and other properties of these indigenous vegetables for food product development and potential commercialization. These are the references that were used in this presentation. And we would like to thank the UP Mindanao in-house research grant for funding this study. Again, this is our research team. The title of the project is Indigenous Vegetable Consumption of In-School Adolescents in Urban and Rural Areas in Davao City. I'm with Professor Miko Castro, Miss Melissa Loquias, Professor Eileen De Lima, Professor Pete Alviola, and Professor Emma Bayogan. So these are also some of the photos that we took during our visits to the participating schools. Again, thank you very much, and happy Women's Month to everyone.